Okay, just to show you what kind of a fan I am, this is my part of my He-Man collection. I have Granomir up there. I've got Castle Grayskull. I got Buzz Off and Extendar, and way up there you can see Mechanic and Stratos. Here we've got Orko and He-Man and. Okay, this is Gimli from Lord of the Rings. I just thought he looked like he could fit in the collection, so I threw him in there. Down here we've got Pro Krusties and a relatively obscure guy from one of the comics. Here's She-Ra. Here's Shakoti. I mean, people who know He-Man know Shakoti is one of the most badass villains ever. Shakoti. Here we have the Evil Horde. Shadow Weaver and Evil Seed, another one of my favorites. And down here we've got Skeletor's group, Jitsu and Spikor and Merman and Triclops and Blade from the movie. And there's Skeletor. And up here we've got the Wind Raider with He-Man. Here's He-Man on Battle Cat. And there's Battle Cat. And there's the original He-Man. There's Lego He-Man, there's the original 1980s Teela, there's Swiftwind, there's the Sorceress. Here's a big statue of the 2002 He-Man. And this is a little D&D sized figure for an upcoming He-Man board game that's coming out. These YouTubers that have millions of followers, and simply by virtue of them having many followers, it gives them a kind of authority about things that they know absolutely nothing about. And they really don't seem to know anything about He-Man or Masters of the Universe or the history of the Masters of the Universe. Because I think if they did, I don't think they would be saying all of this shit that they're saying about Kevin Smith and about this new show. Now, I'm not saying that the show is great. I'm not saying that it could not be better. I definitely think it could be. But I think it's a hell of a lot better than just about anything I've seen He-Man related for the past 30 years. And I've even gone to He-Man.org, which is the premier fan site for Masters of the Universe fans. And I've looked at the forums and I've read people's comments. And yeah, I think a lot of people are disappointed, but just as many people seem to be pleasantly surprised and happy with the show. The people that complain about making things political are the people who are making this political. So the same people who are complaining and angry and they're saying, why does everything have to be woke? And why does everything have to be about feminism? And why does everything have to be about having a political angle? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Did we even watch the same show? I mean, they make it sound like He-Man, came out and said, vote for Joe Biden or something. I'm upset that they're making this show political, that they're using this show as a vehicle to smuggle in their political views. I would say that this show is more of a love letter to the fans than even the original 1980s show. For me, Masters of the Universe was much bigger in my childhood than anything else. Bigger than Star Wars, bigger than Transformers, bigger than G.I. Joe, bigger than Ninja Turtles, bigger than Marvel Comics, bigger than DC Comics, bigger than Star Trek, bigger than any pop culture thing you can reference. He-Man for me was my number one thing by a huge margin. And I would literally buy anything I could get my hands on that was He-Man related. My entire room used to be nothing but He-Man. I had He-Man posters. I had He-Man. I had all the comics. I had all the books. This is my original. You can see this. This is He-Man. This is my He-Man figure that I have had for almost 40 years. I bought this in 1981 when I was 6 years old, and I kept it. And as you can see, it's in perfect condition because this was my most valuable possession. It's still one of my most valuable possessions. I have a re-release here of all the original mini comics. Okay, because I lost some of them when I was a kid. But here is a collection of all the mini comics. Here is another book that I have about Masters of the Universe. All the movies on DVD. Here's a DVD. I have all the seasons you put together. You make Castle Grayskull. Here. Okay, here's a 2002 show. All right. I collected all the 80s figures. I collected all the 2002 figures that came out. And I also collected all the classics figures, which was the new collection that emulated the old style of the 80s, but just updated them with better sculpting and more articulation. So if anyone's going to be upset at Kevin Smith, it should be someone like myself. And yet I'm not upset at all. In fact, I'm very, very happy with what we got. All these YouTubers that are like, I'm so upset about this show. This is such a trap. This is such an insult. Bullshit. You're not a fan. You don't know anything about He-Man. You don't know jack about He-Man. Because if you did, I don't think you wouldn't be saying all this crap. Someone took one of those, the ending of the show where they kind of give you the little moral. And they had Teela and Orko. And Teela says, you should always admit to making a mistake. And Orko says, yeah, but I never make mistakes, And it was like a little joke. And on top of Orko's face, they plastered Kevin Smith's face to make it seem like, yeah, Kevin Smith made a mistake with his show. And he should be ashamed of himself. And what is this awful thing he did? He killed He-Man. And then Teela became the main character. Now, do I like that? No. I don't like it. I would have preferred to see more He-Man, of course, because He-Man is, he's kind of like the main character. But the show isn't called He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. It's called Masters of the Universe. And a real hardcore He-Man fan would know that originally the series was not focused entirely on He-Man. It was actually called Masters of the Universe. And there was a lot of mini comics where the focus was on different characters. So it wasn't always about He-Man. One of my favorite mini comics, He-Man barely appears in that comic because it's all about Fisto, who is a guy with a metal hand. There's a lot of stories like that where He-Man isn't as important. There's episodes of the show where it's almost entirely focused on Teela or Orko. He-Man always makes an appearance, but he's not the main character for every episode and for every story. And this whole thing about, all of a sudden it's, they've shifted the focus onto a female character. Well, guess what? The first movie ever made about He-Man that was in theaters, it was almost entirely about She-Ra. It wasn't about He-Man, it was about She-Ra. First He-Man movie was an origin story about his sister. And not only did She-Ra have the same strength that he had, the same invulnerability that he had, but she also had other powers that he didn't have, right? She-Ra could talk to animals. She could heal people with her touch. And she could turn her sword into different items. She could turn her sword into a helmet, into a shield, into a rope. So she had all these magical powers that He-Man didn't have, making her seem better in many ways than He-Man. And She-Ra was invented a couple years after He-Man. And so if ever there was going to be a complaint, this outrage about this woke feminist culture that's taking over, they should have complained about the very first movie to ever have He-Man in theaters. The culture that's changed isn't that all of a sudden everyone is freaking out and becoming feminist. That's not the problem, okay? The culture that's changing is that now All the people that don't like feminism have this platform to bitch and moan about it and complain endlessly about it. That's what's changed. Like I said, this was the most fan-focused thing I've ever seen. And I include the 80s show into that. And I'll tell you why. Because when I got into He-Man, what got me into He-Man wasn't the show. It was the mini-comics that came out in 1980 and 1981. And in the early mini-comics, the story was very different. He-Man there was no Adam. Okay, He-Man didn't pull a sword and say magic words and become like Superman. There was no secret identity. And then when the show came out, that's when they introduced the sorceress. That's when they introduced Orko. All these new concepts. And in the beginning, I didn't like it very much. I'm like, well, what is this? This isn't the He-Man that I knew. Filmation had taken this idea and they changed it up. They took away He-Man's axe. In a lot of the comics, He-Man uses a battle axe. But they took that away. They made He-Man much less violent. They toned down the violence and they made him almost like a pacifist. And I was like, well, that's not the He-Man I know. What's going on here? So even the original cartoon, I thought to me was a big change from what I knew, And the other thing that all these YouTubers probably have no freaking idea about is that when I used to watch a show as a kid, I was always looking for the characters and the vehicles that were sold to us as toys to be in the show. And we almost never saw them because Mattel, who owned the franchise, and Filmation, the producers of the cartoon, they're always kind of fighting with each other. That was the big secret. Mattel really wanted a TV show that was going to sell toys, and Filmation didn't want to be a toy commercial. And so Filmation would come up with their own characters and their own storylines, like Orko and the Sorceress, who wasn't even, when they appeared in the cartoon, there wasn't even an Orko action figure. There wasn't even a Sorceress. The Sorceress figure, who's one of the most important characters in the show, she was one of the last figures made in the toy line because Mattel was so resistant to get any influence from the show. And the show was so resistant to be influenced by the toy. I think that really, you should get angry about, people should be up in arms about, is the Masters of the Universe movie. Even though I hated the movie, of course I bought it. This is the Masters of the Universe movie with Dolph Lundgren, okay? This thing is the worst adaptation ever made of anything. People say Avatar was a bad adaptation, and I would say to them, and I'm talking about the M. Night Shyamalan film, I would say to those people, when you watch the Avatar movie, or The Last Airbender, I think it's called, do you recognize anything in it that reminds you of the show? You do, right? It's not a good adaptation, but you go, oh, there's Aang. And this fucking thing, okay, if it didn't say Masters of the Universe, I might not even know it has anything to do with He-Man. There's no Orko in this. Castle Grayskull looks nothing like Castle Grayskull. There's no Battle Cat. I mean, He-Man's main thing is he's riding a giant tiger. Well, there's no giant tiger in this movie. It's not even alluded to. It doesn't exist. Okay? It'd be like having Captain America without a shield. He-Man fights with a gun in this movie. He shoots a laser gun about as often as he uses his sword. Adam doesn't exist. There's no Adam in this movie. He never transforms from Adam into He-Man. That doesn't happen. Teela's in it, but she looks nothing like Teela. Man-at-Arms is in it, but he looks nothing like Man-at-Arms. The Sorceress is in it, but she looks nothing like the Sorceress. They didn't even make an attempt to make anything in this movie even resemble the He-Man show or toy line. Skeletor looks a little bit like Skeletor, but just in the face. He's got a skeleton face. It's it. But his clothes are totally different. This is a slap in the face of He-Man fans. Not the Kevin Smith show. That show was a love letter to fans like I've never seen. So whether Kevin Smith said in an interview, I'm not really He-Man fan, I don't care. What he produced, that was a love letter to He-Man fans. What I saw as a fan is that the show really looked like the 80s show, right? I mean, the designs were spot on. Even the little details, even like the city of Eternos looked like an updated version of the original, which is very different than the 2002. The 2002 cartoon changed. This cartoon here changed a lot of the design. So King Randor looked totally different. Queen Marlena looked totally different. But in this show, everyone looked like how they're supposed to look. Teela, Man-at-Arms, everyone looked, with the exception of they made one minor change, and it was a good change. He-Man's chest here has a German Iron Cross. Okay. Now, does this have some secret Nazi connection? I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? But in some of the later figures, they changed the symbol to a decorative H. So some of the other versions of He-Man, like Thunder Punch He-Man and Battle Armor He-Man, all those He-Mans had like a decorative H symbol. And so that's what they did. They went with the decorative H instead of the Iron Cross. I thought that's a good improvement. The thing that really blew my mind is seeing all of these obscure vehicles and characters in the show that I never saw in the 80s. They've never been animated. And I remember as a kid, I was so excited to see anything that was a toy in the show, which we never got to see. They have the Rotar vehicle, which I remember when I was a kid, I actually went around my parents' house collecting coins, and I got a bag of coins and went to the toy store with a bag of coins to buy this thing. And it was never in the cartoon except for when Kevin Smith put it in. I was like, thank you, Kevin Smith, for putting this in there. When Skeletor transforms, in the beginning, he's pretending to be a different character, and then he transforms into Skeletor. He's holding the shaping staff, right? That's from one episode of the show. If you watch the intro, it's easy to know that Orko, Man-at-Arms, and the Sorceress know Adam's secret, right? It's right in the beginning. But what a lot of people don't know is that Queen Marlena, Adam's mom, also knows He-Man's secret. When it's discovered that He-Man died, his mom knew that meant her son was dead too. And I'm like, man, like they just, one episode of the original show from the 80s, and they know their stuff. They know the details. It's awesome. They go to the Sea of Rakash where Merman's lair is, and there's all these like crystal like icebergs all around. Again, that's from an episode of the show. It's the episode of the show where Teela discovers that her mom is the sorceress, which is another secret. And again, when people sit there and they say, "Oh, why did you make Teela like the main character?" Well, what a lot of people don't know is that Teela is supposed to be the next Guardian of Grayskull. It's in the backstory. She has this great destiny that I think the show is setting up. It's not some woke new thing that Kevin Smith came up with. No, Kevin Smith or whoever his writers are, they know the story and they're setting it up. When they go into Preternia, that was another really cool thing, right? Because they had the play set that they never had in the show, right? I was excited to see that. The biggest thing they ever made for the He-Man collection, okay? I didn't get it because, my dad didn't want to shell out the money for that. But that was the one thing I never had. But it was exciting to see it. Their hero was in the show. Wonder Bread He-Man. Right? How many of these YouTubers know about Wonder Bread He-Man? Okay? That's pretty damn obscure. Okay? Wonder Bread He-Man's in the show. Who's Wonder Bread He-Man? Well, Wonder Bread, the company Wonder Bread, they had these little coupons in the bag that you could mail in. Every time you bought Wonder Bread, you could mail it in, and they would send you a special He-Man called Wonder Bread He-Man, which basically looked like He-Man, but he had brown hair and he had like a different armor. Blast Attack was in the show. Who's Blast Attack? He's a guy that he's basically a bomb. He's like a robot who blows up. This is a super obscure character. He's in the show. And there are references from the comic, from the 2002 show, from the toy collections, and from the 80s show, seamlessly blended together into one beautiful narrative. The 2002 show was ridiculous. I didn't like the 2002 show. That also upset me because there were so many stupid things like the backstory of the Skeletor, right? How did Skeletor turn into Skeletor, right? Well, he was originally Keldor. Now that comes from the comics. He was Keldor, who the brother of King Randor. And in the beginning of the 2002 show, Keldor throws some acid, a vial of acid, at King Randor, and Randor blocks. And somehow this vial of acid bounces off of his shield and splashes on Skeletor's face. None of this makes any sense. How does acid bounce? I don't know. Like that's just ridiculous. And how does it bounce and only hit Keldor's face? It doesn't hit anything else, right? It doesn't fall on his clothes. It doesn't hit his shoulders. It just hits his face. So his face starts melting off and he becomes Skeletor. Really? That's how he became Skeletor? I mean, that's completely stupid. I'm sorry. Now, I think later they explain that he goes to Hordak because he's dying, and Hordak says, "Okay, I'm gonna give you this power, this magical power." But I still think this idea of acid bouncing off and splashing with the face, this is just lazy. This is just lazy writing. In the 2002 show, they try to explain Castle Grayskull by saying that all of these powerful wizards got together and they put all their power because Skeletor was coming. And for some reason, they're like, well, we can't stop this guy. Even though we're all powerful, we can't stop Skeletor. He's too powerful. So what they do is they put all their magic into an orb. And all their magic is in this orb. And I'm like, but now Skeletor can just take the orb and use their power. It doesn't make it makes no sense. It would be like, instead of the Avengers fighting Thanos, they all just take all their power and then put it in a little box so Thanos can just steal it. Like, how does that make any sense? That's a 2002 storyline. And then they hide the orb in Castle Grayskull. And I'm like, what? Like, what? What? It's horror. No one's complaining, though, about, because again, YouTube wasn't as prevalent, and you didn't have all these anti-SJWs complaining about shit they know nothing about in 2002, because that would be a legitimate complaint. But this Kevin Smith show, they explained one of the biggest mysteries of the show, which was Castle Grayskull, right? Why does the good guy's castle have Skeletor's face on it? Why does it look evil? Why does it look like the bad guy's castle? That never made any sense. Now, I know the history behind that is because the toy collectors made this castle to be a playset, but they didn't know what it was for, what the story of the castle would be. And then they just kind of handed it over to the comic book writers and said, figure this thing out. Kevin Smith's show makes sense of Castle Grayskull. They said, well, actually, the reason it looks evil is because it's an illusion. It's an illusion to make it look like it's not a special castle, so that people don't attack it and try to steal the magic that's in there. It definitely is a show made for the fans. The only thing that I would object to is getting rid of He-Man. And by the way, that transformation, that's the best transformation I've ever seen. That's fantastic. So if these people don't have a love for the character of He-Man, why they come up with such an amazing transformation, I don't know. But I did think it was a bit of a bummer that he wasn't in the show too often. Does this mean that, they're making it all about Teela? Well, I don't know. I do think Teela has one of the most interesting backstories, and I think that's why they made her important in this. Because her father's man-at-arms, her mother is the sorceress, and there's all these secrets that have been kept from her. So I think that's why it's really about Teela. And we haven't even got to the second part yet. We haven't even got to, season 2 of the show, which may explain all this. Maybe He-Man's going to come back and be a big presence in the show. I don't know. But I have a feeling that if He-Man does come back, I think all these YouTubers are then going to say, well, of course they did it now after we bitched and complained. And, Kevin Smith had all this pressure to bring He-Man back. They're going to bring He-Man back. They're not going to believe that that's the original plan, even though Kevin Smith himself has said, of course the show's about He-Man. I think another reason that they probably got rid of He-Man is because He-Man is godlike in power. I don't think people realize this. He-Man is like Superman. He's moved the moon before. He's lifted like a mountain range over his head. Not a mountain range. And tossed it. Okay? He-Man is ridiculously powerful. Having him in the show creates a Superman problem. And maybe that's why Skeletor turned into Skelegod at the end, so that He-Man would have a challenge when he does eventually show up. I mean, he did come back in the last episode. He was wounded, he was stabbed, he was wounded, but I don't think that means he's going to be dead, Scareglow, oh my God. I love Scareglow. He was one of my favorite figures as a kid. I loved Scareglow, okay? Having him have a whole episode about him, that was like a dream come true for a kid, okay? For a kid that grew up with this figure, dreaming about seeing him in the show. This is something that all these YouTubers know nothing about because they don't have Scareglow sitting on their bookshelf. So when Teela says to Scareglow, I'm your worst nightmare, she's not referring to, I'm going to be the next He-Man. She's referring to, I'm going to be the next sorceress. And as we know, and as any He-Man fan would know, the sorceress is the most powerful magic user in all of Eternia. She's the guardian of the source of all magic in the universe. Do YouTubers know any of this shit? I don't think so. Because if they're real fans, I don't think they would be as upset with Kevin Smith. They're not fans. They're just using the show to push their political agenda, which is, everything is woke now and we have to be upset about all this woke stuff. We have to be upset that there's women in things and there's black people in things and there's multiculturalism. They don't want to see that. All they want to see is white, Anglo-Saxon, skinny, beautiful women with tiny waists and big boobs. And they want to see big, white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, muscular, Nazi ideal men. That's what they want. That's what they want to see. They don't like diversity. And they complain about forced diversity. Forced diversity doesn't exist. Forced diversity is just diversity, but they add that forced on there to make it sound bad. Ooh, well, no one wants anything forced on them, right? But you add the word forced to anything that's going to sound bad, right? Forced nutrition, forced health, forced wealth. Any good thing can sound bad when you add force to it. But you take that forced away, it's just diversity. There's nothing wrong with diversity. Am I hoping to see more He-Man? Of course, I love He-Man. He-Man, by the way, this is why I write fantasy. By the way, I'm a fantasy author because of He-Man. And my first book, Ages of Anya, is very much an homage to He-Man, by the way. Xander, he has long blonde hair and blue eyes. He's really muscular. He has a sword with a skull on it. All of that is in reference to He-Man. Thalana, my female heroine, her name is derived from Teela. And she has like reddish brown hair like Teela has. This is my view of Kevin Smith's show coming from a real fan who knows the show. For me, Kevin Smith's show, thumbs up. Thumbs up. If you do like the show and the video, and if you are a He-Man fan who likes the show, thanks for watching. I've been Nick.